We'll move on to item 5, reports and communications. 5.1, reports from members of the board. We'll start off with Mr. Ferris.
I just wanted to very quickly once again compliment all of the hard work that's been going on with our administration staff, teachers, and parents to try and accommodate the needs of our students in this district at this time. I also want to recognize that clearly there are a lot of students who we are not able to meet their needs. And I think in those areas, I think it is critical that as board members, we do perform our function of advocacy for public education. And I, for one, and I believe this board is committed to continuing the networking that we do to influence those in decision-making positions, because we do need additional flexibility to meet many of the students' needs that are out there. And we've got to find ways to be able to do that. And because of that, I think it's also critical that that parents and other members of our community share with the legislators and the governor what kinds of concerns they have about the needs of students that are going unmet, because we're pretty restricted on what we can do, but there are options for the other layers of government to create opportunities for us, and I think we need to make sure everyone's aware of that.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Mr. Johnson?
I don't have anything more to add than that. Thank you, Bill, for sharing our sentiments. I think it's the sentiments of the whole board that we know there are students out there that aren't getting all their needs met in this distance learning environment, and we're doing what we can to meet those. So I think we need to make sure we keep that in our forefront. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rockwell?
Yeah, I actually, I could pile on to that too. I think, one of the things that's been nice, you get used to watching social media and things and seeing negative comments, and that's sort of just the way people do things these days. For some reason, they talk negatively in public to everybody that can't do anything for them, and they never talk to the people that actually can do something for them. But one thing that's been actually fairly refreshing, and is I've seen a lot of positive comments, a lot of thank yous for the hard work that everybody's doing, understanding that we are doing a lot better than we were doing in the spring, but that there's still a long way to go and a lot to do to make this be as good an educational process as sitting everybody in a classroom like we did 6 months ago. But so I'm actually pleased to be seeing a lot of positive comments in the community. So I appreciate people understanding where we are and understanding it's a hard place, and understanding that we're all doing the best we can to make things good for the students in the district. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rockwell. And I'd like to welcome our new student board member, Madison Johnson, who's sitting and watching us on YouTube. Looking forward to having you next month on either Zoom or in person. Move on to item 5.2, Superintendent's Report. Dr. Ostesh.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Thank you, Mr. Scott. I'll start with an enrollment report. Although I might need to switch mics. I'm sensing the test. Let me turn it off and then on again. I'm sorry. That's okay. Yeah, I'll move over.
It's a step over, not a step down.
Okay, test. That's much better. Customarily, I would give some attendance figures, actual attendance figures. I won't be able to do that this evening due to the tremendous change that has taken place in how we calculate attendance. And if I gave you a number tonight, it wouldn't be accurate. Although we feel like in the elementary numbers, we have a pretty accurate accounting of it, and it's looking good. Let me talk about enrollment, though. Let's see, as of today, our total enrollment is 5,086 students. Last year this time, we were at 5,135. So we're down 49 students. That's relatively good news because in a distance learning environment, we know that there are some parents who have identified a different way that they would prefer to educate their students. But based on some trajectory and some projections, without the distance learning disruption to the environment, I think we would ordinarily have been perhaps up between 150 or 200 students instead of down 49. But the net down of 49 positions us well. Our teachers and staff are working extremely hard. And as Mr. Rockwell said, we know there are a lot of really, a lot of successes that are happening. And so we believe our numbers will actually increase. And we know that there have been some inquiries and people moving into town, and we know they will increase. So 5,086 as of today for our enrollment. I'd like to issue some very hearty commendations to the Sierra Sands family. I'd like to start with the Board of Education through this pandemic throughout the summer with the efforts of lifting up and launching distance learning. It's required a ton, several special meetings, a lot of additional commitment on your part, which you have shown admirably. And so we in the district, all 600 employees, really appreciate your commitment, each of you, each of the four of you. And we just are very thankful that we have a Board of Education that is engaged and impassioned in the work that you do to provide the guidance that you do for us. So thank you to the Board of Education. I'd like to offer my highest commendation to our district staff. Tremendous effort behind the scenes, 7 days a week, putting all of the details together to pivot a systematic implementation of education through a virtual environment for all students. And I know that teachers, admin, and staff are absolutely exhausted. I know that tomorrow when 2:45 and 3 o'clock and those times arrive, that there will be some figurative collapsing going on. And I know that to be true. So I really appreciate the genuine, high-level commitment by our staff. I can't express it adequately, and I'm very grateful. I'd like to acknowledge all the schools and departments for knowing and understanding their needs and finding solutions, in many cases independently on the way. Of course, the district provides a lot of guidance and support, but in many cases, school principals and their teams, if they're secondary, or teacher leader groups, or any employee in many cases has just been professional and self-reliant and matched the support that we provide, but also exhibited a professionalism that I'm very appreciative of. I'd also like to thank our students and their parents and their family members who have made a huge commitment to supporting virtual learning. It's not lost on me or my team that moving into a virtual environment is a huge commitment and a big change for families. It's disruptive, it's hard, and in many cases it requires a different and new commitment and sacrifice. And so whereas it's always been important to have the family as a partnership, it's never been more important than now. And so we really appreciate families for really committing to that. I'm grateful for my cabinet team and their executive leadership. Michelle Savko is here, and she and her team built up a comprehensive and rigorous, and I would say first-class distance learning program so that over 5,000 students in our valley won't skip a beat as they move forward. You know, let's not forget that we're not only serving our local needs for local reasons, but we also want to give lift to our students' wings so that they can compete with other communities and gain entrance into the academies and the universities and the places of work that they choose. And so we push hard in many cases, and I know down the road when we look back, we'll reflect very positively and appreciatively of all the efforts that have been put forth. So thank you, Michelle. Brian Auld is not here this evening, but he continues to negotiate very productively with our bargaining units so that everyone is safely at work. And Pam Smith is here in the audience, and she continues to position our district very strategically for fiscal support so that programs can fly seamlessly, and we appreciate that. Paul Delbick, you joined us just in time to dive in head first, and with all things special education, you're doing a great job advocating and pushing forward, so we appreciate the expertise that you bring us. And Donnie Morrison's in the back supporting us right now. Donnie Morrison has pulled a few rabbits out of the hat with onboarding Canvas and also organizing that massive effort of equipping our students with Chromebooks and families who need it with internet connectivity and all things technology. So thank you. So many things are going so incredibly well. I can't express my thanks adequately enough, but I hope that these words are received and felt. And we need to pause, even if it's brief. We need to pause and celebrate all these successes that I promised we would experience back at our all hands meeting, and they have materialized. But I also want to acknowledge there are very real challenges that we must still work through, and be humble about acknowledging them and identifying future and better solutions. And I'd like to start with special education. I believe to Mr. Ferris's point a little earlier, there are some students in some areas who are not being best served in a virtual environment. I want to say that in an EdSource article published on August 14, a very important story highlighted an upcoming new waiver program that will allow schools to open for small groups with acute needs, and acute is in quotes. We expect that the California Department of Public Health will provide details for districts to move forward in the application process. The governor was quoted in this article as saying that this new policy is out of, quote, recognition that there are kids that will never be able to adjust to learning online no matter what kind of support we provide, even if we individualize it. There's another quote in that article which I printed out, and I'll cite it. Another quote is, many special education students have suffered during distance learning. Students with autism, learning disabilities, and emotional conditions, as well as those who normally would receive in-person occupational and physical therapy. But large numbers of homeless and migrant students and students in foster care also have been greatly affected. And the article goes on to very aptly describe those gaps and those holes that we need to fix. So I want to acknowledge that that's a broad concern, but we want to own it in Sierra Sands and say that happens here too. So we are very eager, Mr. Delbick and I and SELPA and the district have been working very closely to follow that new waiver process carefully, because we'll be the first in that bunch to leverage that new opportunity. We'll work with our bargaining units, and we will dive into that, because we do need to better serve our most needy students because they're not being adequately served in the current environment. We need to acknowledge that. Nutritional services is both a success and a challenge story. Our staff is doing an incredible job. They've been doing an incredible job, but we recognize, and I've talked with Ms. Groves about this, that we have some improving to do, because whereas ordinarily in an on-campus typical environment, we would serve around 2,000 lunches a day. And whereas March through May, when we transitioned into distance learning, but we were under a different federal waiver program where all meals were free for any aged children up until 18, we were doing about 1,200 breakfasts and lunches today. We are now in an environment where the distribution of meals, the purchasing of meals, and the free and reduced eligibility for meals is the same as if we were on campus, but we're not on campus. And so on Monday, we served 508 lunches and 351 breakfasts. And on Tuesday, we actually served 354 lunches and then went up in breakfast at 451. Those are very low numbers. And when you recognize that over 50% of our student population qualifies for the free or reduced federal lunch program, and you have numbers of 300 and 400, you can make a clear distinction that we are underserving our most needy students nutritionally. Now, there may be a lot of reasons for that. We're speculating. It could be, there's a heat wave and smoke, and we're in our first week of distance learning, and there's a lot going on that's new, and this might level up. But Ms. Groves is already thinking about some very creative ideas. She's going to, she and the district are going to partner in surveying our parents and identifying from them what those barriers might be. We're considering changing or adding our meal service to perhaps a couple-hour window in the late afternoon, early evening when parents are off of work. They can pick up meals for the following day, and so we're going to survey if that might be a well-received idea. And we'll survey and we'll just find out from our parents what would better serve them. So that's a challenge that we are acknowledging, and we're going to build on that. Another challenge is screen time. We've received compliments, we've received questions, and we've received concerns regarding screen time for our children. And so we know that our schedules vary in length and sequence based on age level, and we're basing our decisions on Senate Bill 98, which is the law and lays out very specific guidelines on live and interactive daily instruction. So we will continue to get stakeholder feedback, teacher feedback, student feedback, and whereas there probably isn't major change that could be done, there perhaps could be down the road some refinements or deepening of practices that might improve there. So we will study that carefully, and we'll be interested in that. Zoom interaction and etiquette is, again, these are all broad areas, but areas that we own in Sierra Sands. Of course, the vast majority of all our Sierra Sands students are an absolute pleasure. We are experiencing some instances, though, where individuals may be using a fictitious name and joining a class inappropriately, and we are working closely together to monitor the situation, utilizing the waiting room feature in Zoom, and properly controlling the environment for instructional appropriateness. Another area of concern for us to work through is the lack of childcare, the lack of sports, the lack of numerous activities, co-curricular activities, performance activities, and this is a real issue for many people. And while distance learning is temporary, I want everyone to know that I'm sensitive to the fact that for many of our families, every single day counts in this regard. And one of the last challenges I'll identify is like, for example, we have 3 school resource officers who are very valued by our school district and by our community, and in a virtual environment, their ability to serve has changed. So using that resource name, we're being resourceful. SROs are conducting home visits right now for students who have not yet been responsive to emails or phone calls. And I had mentioned earlier that the new state system for attendance does include physical presence in the virtual classroom as well as participation and engagement. So the partnering with SROs is important. Attendance and engagement are among our highest priorities, and the SROs are showing some real partnership here. And I'll just end my remarks that obviously there are future items, and one of them that I want to state is that we are reimagining our back-to-school nights. Those are really important, and so we're working hard on that plan in a virtual format, and more details are to come in this effort, but I'm letting everyone know that we will indeed have a back-to-school night for every school, and look forward to hearing from us on that. And that concludes my remarks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Ostash. We'll move on to item 5.3, report to the Board of Trustees by the Desert Area Teachers Association. Any correspondence?
President Scott.
Is that Mr. Rockwell?
President Scott. Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt, but and I hope this isn't too inappropriate, but I would have to say I really appreciate the superintendent's report tonight. I in my almost 15 years on the board, that's probably the most information-filled and heartfelt delivery of that information that I've probably ever heard. And I could, because I understand it too. We are over the top thrilled with, what people have been doing and how people have been doing it. But we are also, like you stated, that we are, banging our head on the table, wanting to do better for those that we're not reaching as well as we'd like. So thank you so much for, covering the highs and the lows and, getting us all informed to where we are there. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Austin.
You're welcome.
No written correspondence. We'll move on to 5.4, report to the Board of Trustees by the California School Employees Association. No written. No communication from the public. And we'll move on to item 6. We have no educational administration. Item 7, policy development and review. Item 7.1, approval of revisions to board policy exhibit 5145.6, parental notification. Dr. Ostash.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. In Mr. Ald's absence, I will cover this. So the Human Resources Department, of course, reviews policies, and this is a policy review and revision. Policy 5145.6 is updated for gender neutrality and to update legal references based on new laws reflected in the accompanying exhibit. The exhibit is updated reflecting new law, which is SB 74 from this year, which extends the suspension of certain mandated activities through the 2021 school year, reflect new federal legislation, which requires notice of the contact information of the district's Title IX coordinator, delete legal citations for the Open Enrollment Act, which is no longer operational, delete reference to BP 5141.33, which is no longer applicable to exclusions from school, reflect a new law, which is SB 1109, which requires dissemination of an opioid fact sheet to parents and guardians of student athletes. It reflects a new law, AB 2370, which requires child care centers with buildings constructed before 2010 to test drinking water for lead and notify parents and guardians of the results of that test. It adds notice requirements for districts receiving impact aid for children residing on Indian lands. It reflects new federal regulation, which requires notifications to the parents or guardians of a student who complains of sexual harassment regarding rights, the complaint process, and the availability of supportive measures, and move to the classroom notice requirement pertaining to complaints about health and safety in California state preschool programs. There are no financial implications identified, and I recommend the approval of the revisions to Board Policy Exhibit 5145.6, parental notifications, as presented.
Move recommended action.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from the board or staff? And confirming no written correspondence, or we'll have a roll call vote. Mr. Ferris? Aye. Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Rockwell?
Aye.
And myself, aye. That's unanimous. We'll move on to item 8, personnel administration. 8.1.
Move 81A2.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We'll have a roll call vote. Mr. Ferris?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Rockwell?
Aye.
Myself, aye. It's unanimous. Move on to item 8.3, waiver request enabling the district to assign individuals in certificated positions without appropriate credentials. Mr. Ostash.
Yes, Mr. Scott, this is that time of year where we're working with some of our newer, not always brand new, but newer faculty, and this is just one of our waiver abilities. So approval of the governing board is required when a district is filing for a variable term waiver, a provisional internship permit, or a short-term staff permit in order to assign an individual who is not appropriately credentialed yet. But sometimes I think we ought to add that word, not appropriately credentialed yet, and for his or her assignment. They're typically in a program and they're moving through the program and they're fully qualified to be in the position, but they haven't been fully credentialed yet. You can see the current considerations for all of the numbers of individuals there, and there are no financial implications, and I recommend the approval of the submission of requests for a variable term waiver, the provisional interim permit, or a short-term staff permit as described, in order that the above-named individuals may be assigned in the designated positions for the 2021 school year.
Move recommended action.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from the board or staff? We'll have a roll call vote. Mr. Ferris?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Rockwell?
Aye.
Myself, aye. It's unanimous. We'll move on to item 9, general administration. 9.1, nominations for CSBA Directors at Large, Asian, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic to the California School Boards Association Board of Directors. Dr. Ostash.
The CSBA Board of Directors is comprised of 21 regional directors as well as the officers of the association, any officer or director of the National Association Boards Association who resides in California, and the president of the California County Boards of Education. In addition, there are 5 directors at large. The directors, along with the officers and members of the Delegate Assembly, are a vital link in the association's governance structure, ensuring that the association continues to effectively carry out its mission. Nominations for 2 CSBA directors at large, Asian Pacific Islander and Hispanic, will be accepted until October 2, 2020. Any CSBA member board is eligible to nominate board members for any of these director at large seats. All nominees must serve on a CSBA member board, and each nominating board must certify that the nominee has consented to be nominated at the time of nomination. The election for these 2-year seats will take place during the Delegate Assembly meeting in December. No financial implications identified, and I don't have a recommendation. It's the board may, if it wishes, nominate candidates for the offices of CSBA Director at Large, Asian Pacific Islander, and Hispanic.
Does the board have any nominations? Hearing none, we'll move on to 10, Construction Administration. 10.1, Report to the Board, Construction Activities and Issues. Mr. Coit.
President Scott, members of the board, Superintendent Ostash, staff, and community, I'm pleased to give this update regarding the district's construction activities. This report is presented for informational purposes and no action is required. Item 3.4 of the June 11, 2020 board meeting authorized the district's construction manager, Colombo Construction Company, to solicit new or revised bids for some of the contracts required to complete the ADA accessibility projects scheduled for completion over the summer. I am pleased to report that 6 of the trade contracts were successfully rebid, resulting in a savings of $248,486.31 over the original bid package price. Final inspections and punch walks for the ADA projects are scheduled for next week. And continuing with some of our other projects, the borough's PAC earthquake repairs, bid packages are being prepared by Colombo Construction Company with the expectation that the project will go out for bid in early September. Sierra Vista canopy repairs, design is being reviewed for constructability by Colombo Construction Company at this time. And our new Richmond school, schematic design for the new Richmond campus is nearing completion. The project architect and construction manager are developing construction estimates. And any questions about any of those items?
Any questions from the board? Doesn't appear so.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Coit.
Thank you.
Move on to item 11, Business Administration. 11.1, approval of resolution number 3, 2021 to establish temporary interfund transfers. Ms. Smith.
Yeah, and the background and the current considerations are the same as they were for the public hearing, with the exception of the goal of this is to pass a resolution allowing temporary interfund borrowing for the 2021 year. And it is recommended that the board pass that resolution.
Move recommended action.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from the board or staff? Mr. Ferris.
I'd just like to make a comment. I just want to say how much I appreciate the fact that the history of this district board and administration in being fiscally conservative allows us to be talking about transfers and not loans, and that's a much better place to be. So I want to thank everybody for that long-term success.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Any further questions or comments? We have a motion and a second. I have a call for a roll call vote. Mr. Ferris?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Rockwell?
Aye.
I myself, aye. It's unanimous. We'll move on to 11.2, approval of agreement to provide meals to Ballas Montessori Preschool and Kindergarten. Ms. Smith.
So Ballas Montessori Preschool and Kindergarten operates a preschool and kindergarten program in Ridgecrest. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, Ballas required students to bring their lunches from home. Due to new pandemic guidelines, they must now provide lunches that are prepackaged in individual containers. The Nutrition Services Department was contacted by Ballas about the possibility of purchasing meals for their program. The primary goal of the Nutrition Services Program is to ensure that children receive safe, nutritious meals that meet state guidelines. In order to support this goal, the district provides meals to children in the community during the summer under the Seamless Summer Feeding Program, and also provides meals to the Head Start preschool program on a daily basis. Under the terms of this agreement, Ballas will pay full price for the meals, so there would be no additional food cost to the district. Ballas is willing to pick the meals up on a daily basis, so there will be no transportation cost associated with the service, and the Nutrition Services Department staff will be preparing thousands, right now hundreds, but hopefully thousands, of prepackaged meals daily for the SSUSD distance learning students. It is not anticipated that the meals purchased by Ballas will require additional labor. It is deemed a benefit to the community for the district to provide this service to Ballas students, especially given the restrictions imposed under pandemic guidelines. There are no financial implications, as meals will be paid for in full, and it is recommended that the board approve an agreement to provide meals to Ballas Montessori Preschool and Kindergarten as presented.
Move recommended action.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from the board or staff? I would just like to say I appreciate the school district partnering with other entities in our community. I mean, I know this is going to benefit us in the future, and it's just always nice to see that. And it looks like we'll be using recent equipment soon.
Yes.
That was purchased. Good.
Should be
Good.
shipped shortly.
Good. No further questions or comments. I'll call for a roll call vote. Mr. Ferris?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Rockwell?
Aye.
Myself, aye. It's unanimous.
Thank you.
We will temporarily adjourn the regular meeting and move into the Intercurrent Schools Finance Authority and Board of Directors meeting. And we'll move into item number 1, adoption of the agenda. Any changes?
No changes.
Item 2 is approval of minutes of the regular meeting of July 16th, 2020. Any corrections? Hearing none, those minutes will stand. We'll adjourn the Intercurrent Schools Financing Authority Board of Directors meeting and move back into the Sierra Sands Unified School District regular meeting. Move on to item 13, consent calendar.
Move the entire consent calendar.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We'll have a roll call vote. Mr. Ferris.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Rockwell.
Aye.
Myself, aye. It's unanimous. I'll move on to item 14, future agenda. Any future agenda items? And then, hearing none, we'll move on to item 15, adjournment. And the next meeting, I don't see it on my notes here, will be September, what was that? September 10? I know, man, I'm telling you, it was just one of those days. September 10th. Thank you. You guys, hope your Friday goes well and enjoy your weekend.